Hotep, and welcome once again to another edition of Community Cop. My name is Noel, leader, one of the co-founder members of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. I'm here with my co-host, AKA Michael Graves, Big Mike.
Namaste, brother. Yes, sir.
Okay, I thought you wasn't there for a second, brother. We like to say hello to our viewing audience. This is where truth and real talk occurs. We ask that you sit tight. And those of you who catch the program or want to catch the program can catch it on YouTube. Just look up Community Cop. And we ask those of you who do watch the program on Community Cop, share your thoughts by writing down a comment, and also subscribe to our channel. That way it can be boosted up. Okay, as is customary, we like to start off with our historical piece. We have quite a few birthdays of some heroes that Michael wanted to share. I'm going to list them off, Michael, and then you can comment on them afterwards. There's Gil Noble, who was born on 2/22/1932. Amos Wilson, psychologist Amos Wilson, was born on 2/22/1940. Was his birthday, Michael?
Dr. Amos Wilson?
Yes.
Yes, 2/23/1941. Okay,
and we have William Jones, we have Robert Williams, and William Leo Hansberry.
Yes.
Why don't you tell our viewing audience about all of these heroes?
Just want to say we're briefly and respect the time because each of these men in their own right would deserve a lot of time, but given the necessity to move quickly, I'll just say that Gil Noble, the best TV personality we ever produced. What a great man, what a warm, loving Black man, very proud and sincere, a good brother who gave his best to highlight the plight of our people and certainly to elevate our thinking. So long live the spirit of Gil Noble. He invited me and yourself, Noel, several times, either together or separately, to do his show. His show was known all over the East Coast, like it is, best show on TV. We would like to believe that we could do something along those lines. That's what our hope always is, but certainly his contribution was invaluable.
Okay, the other ones?
Okay, let's keep going. Dr. Amos Wilson, one of the best minds we've ever developed. What a great man. The first time I saw him at the Slave Theater United African Movement, I thought I was listening to Malcolm or somebody. Incredible. It's one thing to read his books, but it's another thing to see that brother in person. All I could tell you is that if you missed him, thank God for videos. You still can catch the great Dr. Amos Wilson, who dedicated his life to fighting white supremacy and elevating the minds and the thinking of our people. And then certainly, when you think of the great William Augustus Jones, the quintessential pastor in the Black community. Certainly, he was a man among men, that strong, booming voice from Bethany. What a great man, a great leader, a great person, the great William Augustus Jones. And I would be remiss if I didn't remember him. And certainly those who know him just know how great he was. And we all owe a debt of gratitude to brothers like the great Reverend Dr. William Augustus Jones for his leadership. And we always will. And certainly Brian from the mighty CMOTEP organization. If I didn't mention Dr. William Augustus Jones during this time, I know I'd be getting a call from you. So I had to do that. And certainly Robert Williams, I mean, who hasn't heard of the way he organized Black people? Certainly Negroes with Guns. We know that coming out of Monroe, North Carolina, and just doing so much for our people. Ultimately had to lead the country, but showed us how to fight. And it was a good fight at that. Everybody did not go with the nonviolence, which he did initially, but there came a time where he had to believe in self-defense, which he did. And last but not least, Dr. William Leo Hansberry. If we had to pick who was the real father of nationalism, Pan-Africanism, and Black history among our people here in the wilderness, North America, I'm pretty sure more often than not, people will say Dr. William Leo Hansberry, who started African studies at Howard, who was battling way back in the 1920s, 100 years ago, talking about the Black man's history when the white man claimed we didn't have any history and that somehow they taught our history began with slavery. It was Dr. William Leo Hansberry, who was Dr. Clark before Dr. Clark, Dr. Ben, but long before there was a Dr. Ben. He was a pioneer at this teaching, studying, going all over the world. He was the one that challenged Dr. Reisner, the top white Egyptologist in the world, to show that ancient Kemet was Black and proved it beyond a shadow of a doubt. And certainly later on, it was the Dr. Bens and Clarks of the world, you know, who waged that mighty battle. But in the early days, it was all about Dr. William Leo Hansberry, the great doctor who just did so much for our people.
All right. We thank you for remembering those great heroes. And anyone who wanted to hear some of these individuals, especially as it relates to Amos Wilson, you know, he has many videos on YouTube. One of the greatest books that I ever read was a book that he produced called Black Power. It's a very big volume book, but it has so much
blueprint for Black Power.
Right, Blueprint for Black Power. A very, very important book that's packed with information. I mean, one of the problems I had in reading that book, it seemed like I was underlining or highlighting every sentence. You know, it got to a point where I'm like, yo, I might as well just highlight the whole book. But that's Blueprint to Black Power by Amos Wilson. And we thank you, Michael, for reminding us about all these individuals who contributed much to our elevation while they were here on planet Earth. All right, we want to fast forward to some current issues. Those of you watching the program may know recently, President Joe Biden announced his candidate to the Supreme Court. Many of us were happy over the fact that he made a decision to pick an African-American female. But we also, we're not connected so much on the skin analysis. You know, we want a Black female or Black male who has something to contribute to the Black community or has a commitment to the Black community. Many of you heard for the first time, and many people have discussed since his announcement of the candidate that he chosen, which is Ketanji Brown Jackson. Some of you heard of the first time that out of the 6 candidates that he mentioned was on his short list, 4 of them were married to Caucasian men. Some people take issue with that or have a concern, not necessarily because of the marriage, but because historically of people's commitment when they married outside of the race. So that was a concern that out of the 6 women that he did name that were on his list, 4 out of the 6, which is a very high percentage, were married to white men. And of course, the one that he ultimately decided to pick, Ketanji Brown Jackson, is married to a white male. That aside, you know, recently Alabama, a former Black federal judge, the first Black federal judge of Alabama, W.U. Clement, recently asked President Biden to reconsider his selection on her because of her track record as it relates to employment lawsuits that came before her courtroom. It's been reported that out of 30 out of 40 times he sided with the employee. Many times these were discrimination lawsuits filed by African Americans. The one that he points out the most was against Lockheed Martin, a defense contractor, where you had over 5,500 African Americans file discrimination complaints against Lockheed, from everything from hostile work environments to the evaluation system, something similar that we filed with the New York City Police Department and won. Racism was embedded into the culture at Lockheed, and you had over 500 members, Black members, you know, sign on to this class action lawsuit. Now, Lockheed had decided to settle this particular lawsuit for $22 million, and it was very peculiar that Judge Ketanji made a decision to throw out the settlement, to reject the settlement, to say, basically say to Locke, yo, you don't have to settle with these people because they didn't prove some of the minuscule issues that she said was mandatory. And, meanwhile, that left the 5,500 African Americans who signed on to, and win. I mean, I think the culture of racism that existed at this defense contract was not even debatable, but she decided the way she did. And this former federal judge pointed that out, as well as a few other cases. As I stated, out of the 40 cases that she decided before 213, she decided on behalf of the employees 30 out of 40 times. That aside, I think everybody can be given a chance. But Michael, what are some of your thoughts prior to her actually being appointed to the Supreme Court as she goes through this process? I mean, are you surprised of the percentages that I announced in terms of the 4 out of 6 women that he announced were married to white men, and that she has a tendency, I don't know about her commitment to our community. I did take issue with another comment she made, but I'll let you comment before I bring that up.
Well, certainly, I know you're asking somewhat facetiously, does that have anything to do with Biden's judgment? And certainly, I believe it does, because his U.S. Attorney General, the person he picked, is a person who always tended to favor, in all the civil rights cases that he had judged, more often than not, he went against the civil rights movement and favored the people that they were complaining on, whether it was a corporation or what have you. He sided in their favor. So or in the case where it was police brutality, he always sided in favor of those police agencies. So he's the U.S. Attorney General. That's not an accident. It's not an accident that Biden's pick for vice president is allegedly a Black woman. I don't know whether she considers herself Black or Indian or somewhere in between, or does she believe she's white, or whatever other term she wants to use, because when she was asked during the campaign, when she was actually running for president, they asked her, do you feel proud as an African-American running for president? She said, I feel proud as an American running for president. So she wouldn't even admit to her Blackness then at that time. So it's not an accident that he picked her, and she is a person who's married to a white man. So it's not after a while, you can't say it's a coincidence that the Blacks that he picked are people that are knee deep in their associations with whites. So he's not picking Black people that have a history of dealing in Blackness. He's not dealing with nationalists, Pan-Africanists, people from that bend. He's dealing with people who are what so-called well-adjusted in the white world, that people that will give in when it's time to give in and work with whites, and certainly not challenge whites. And certainly she's not challenging Biden himself. So I would just say that that's not a coincidence. I think that's, if anything, it's a requirement that they have these strong white associations to be around him in any capacity, whether a cabinet member or whether a designee for a certain high political post.
And Michael, it's good that you brought up the selection of the Attorney General, because when Biden was considering choosing them, you had civil rights organizations and leaders of civil rights press Biden, say, do not pick this man. This individual doesn't have a history. Matter of fact, he has a history against civil rights movements. And of course, President Biden ignored him. So I see President Biden as a slickster. I see him as one who knows how to take advantage of an opportunity as it relates to, especially the skin analysis. Those individuals, as you stated, that he chooses don't have a commitment to our community, although they may be from our community. and look like members of our community. They don't have a history. They don't have a track record, a documented track record of being involved in movements specifically designed to improve our community. I mean, Kamala Harris, many critics, and one of the reasons why she wasn't successful in her bid for president because of her record as a prosecutor in Los Angeles. So, it's definitely a matter of fact that when he chooses somebody from our community because it's politically convenient for him, there's a certain type that he will choose, and there's a certain type that he will not even consider. And as I stated, when you look at 4 out of the 6 women that he even brought up, out all of the Black judges that are in America that qualify for consideration to the Supreme Court, that 4 out of the 6, which is, as I stated, a very high percentage, were married to white men. And I don't think that's by accident either. Closing comments?
No, that, and I'll just say that the same goes for President Obama.
Right.
He's not far removed from President Obama in that regard.
Exactly. All right. Another story we wanted to talk about. Recently, was an article written on Malcolm X. I think it was quoted as the last days of Malcolm X. One of the things that I find very peculiar is individuals are attempting to rewrite history. It's not for the generations that lived through that history, but perhaps for our young folks and for future generations. They're trying to distort some of the things that actually happened, because of course, the farther you get away from Malcolm and the events of Malcolm, people have to rely just on what's written, So, Michael, you wanted to make comment on that particular article.
Yes, the article was somewhat troubling because from the outset, it talked about what was Malcolm working on and what was he about in them last days. And I found it peculiar that to talk about his assassination and to limit it to his last few days, and then to tie in the possible connection with his assassination with the Nation of Islam, I thought that they was actually bringing back Malcolm to life after 57 years and then killing the nation. And in that way, you're killing Malcolm again while you rewrite a new history on Malcolm. So they raised questions about, from the outset in the first paragraph, is talking about what do you think of his pregnant wife with 4 little girls watching Malcolm being gunned down. That's not the way you start an article about a man's life. And then you talk about him, bullets being aimed at a father, husband, and the symbol for courage for all people. Malcolm was not viewed as a symbol of courage for all people at that time in 1965. They went on to talk about in 64, he went to Mecca. He went to Hajj in Mecca after being suspended in late 1963. They talked about at Hajj, he no longer believed in the innate evil of white people, and that somehow he saw that there was unity between white Muslims and Black Muslims in Mecca. And the person who wrote that article, see, either they don't know or they don't know that we know that that was not Malcolm's first visit to Saudi Arabia. See, if they did their homework, they would know that Malcolm in the late 50s visited Saudi Arabia. And he saw the hypocrisy of the Arab and that there was a false sense of unity between Arabs and Blacks, and that Arabs always felt superior. Malcolm's words of talking about a reawakening is strategic and political in the sense that Malcolm was literally almost by himself while he was building up a new organization. You know, Muslim Arts Incorporated, as well as the Organization of Afro-American Unity. So therefore, you need alliances. So he went there and took Hajj. He had went there earlier. The reason he didn't do Hajj was because he wanted his leader, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, to go to Hajj first. He didn't want to be the first person from the nation. That's how humble he was to do Hajj before the messenger. Consequently, he let Elijah Muhammad go first. But he had went there earlier, but didn't take Hajj. So when it starts talking about Malcolm saw people in a different light, he developed a different perspective. Malcolm always were aware of the hypocrisy of Arabs and their mistreatment of Africans. To this day, they sell Africans on slave blocks in Darfur and other places in Sudan and the like. You can go all throughout the Arab world and see those billions of dollars that they have. They do not share those with Africans. And you see how they abuse Black women all over the world. And you could see it right here in these little stores that they have, the mistreatment that they have of little girls and Black women that are on welfare or need credit in these little stores, the things that they do and the disrespect they show and the poor food that they sell and all that. Assalamu alaikum, they saying all that while they treat Black people poorly. Malcolm saw that hypocrisy even back then. Malcolm understood that the white man is the devil. Malcolm believed that, and Malcolm was still a nationalist and Pan-Africanist when he was killed. Malcolm did not change. Malcolm still believed in the unity of Black people, and that's what he was trying to unify. It wasn't that he was trying to bring all people together. He knew, Malcolm said there needed to be Black unity before there is any unity with anybody else. You must unite among yourselves. So just want to take issue and with that narrative that somehow Malcolm's eyes got open when he went to Saudi Arabia, to Mecca, and that somehow his eyes was closed before that, because what you're trying to say is that the nation of Islam is closed-minded, lacks vision, lacks understanding of the world, and that somehow if you go to Hajj and you do things the way Arabs do it, somehow you have a better worldview and you more open and you have a more full scope of life and breadth of the world.
Well, I mean, you know, so many people engage in revisionist history. You know, you cannot base relationships between Africans and Muslims on what goes on in Mecca or at Hajj. That's a sanitized location, highly religious. Everyone's on their best behavior. They're not dealing with the inner dealings or personal dealings or political dealings with each other. It's a place of worship. Right. I don't think it's debatable. Or when you look at books such as The Destruction of African Civilization, or when you look at the map, it's called North Africa, not North Arabia. But you see so many Arabs occupy lands that are in Africa, you know, and they didn't come there, you know, they weren't invited to come there.
Right.
You know, they came there and took over just like other imperialists do as well. So the relationship between Arabs and Africans is not even debatable. They've been just oppressive, exploitive, and much of the oil that they presently pump out of the ground and benefit from their societies and the ride around in Mercedes-Benz is African oil. They make very little contributions to those individuals, those governments on the African continent. So, you know, Malcolm X's eyes was open when he accepted the teachings of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad.
That's right.
Matter of fact, he wasn't even Malcolm X before he met the honorable Elijah Muhammad. You know, so the Malcolm X, the history and the legacy of Malcolm X is solely because of his of the teaching of the Elijah Muhammad, because that's who he credited for changing his life. So, like I said, a lot of people are engaged in revisionist history, And I thank you for pointing that out. Closing comments on that point?
Yeah, I would just say again that Malcolm understood that our people are at its best when we're unified, when we can think, when we can see things in a more collective fashion. Malcolm's eyes were not opened in Mecca. Malcolm's eyes was open, as you pointed out, when he went from Red, Malcolm Little, to Malcolm X, to Minister Malcolm X. His eyes was opened by the most honorable Elijah Muhammad. His eyes was opened by the nation and the brotherhood that they showed him. And he was on a path to getting better, to being more intelligent, more prudent, more skilled, a great orator in his own right, and certainly the nation. There would have been no Malcolm if it wasn't for the Nation of Islam. So they did not close his eyes, they opened his eyes, and certainly the contribution of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad is immeasurable.
Right. And anyone traveling to Mecca and for the Hajj, as I stated, that's not, that's a unique experience which doesn't truly reflect the relationship, especially from a historical perspective, of African members of the African American or African community throughout the diaspora and Arabs. Historically they have been very hostile to African governments, African nations, and African people when they participated in the destruction of Africans, and we don't even want to talk about their contribution to the transatlantic slave trade. So we'll just leave it right there. Another story we want to talk about is recently Jackson County Circuit Court Judge Dale Young made a ruling in the criminal case of Officer Devontae Nari. Some of you may remember he's the individual who killed Cameron Lamb as he was backing a truck into his garage. Officer Devontae Nari claimed that he had a weapon, and him and his partner was approaching in plain clothes. His partner did what a lot of police officers do. They say gun, even though they don't see a gun or there is no gun, they just say gun. And shots were fired. Cameron Lamb was killed, and there was some movement around of bullets that were allegedly found in his pocket. The gun was placed, was taken up and put close to his body. They were found to have lied or perjured themselves. And ultimately he was found guilty. He was convicted of manslaughter, but the judge took the unique measure and stating that he didn't have to be incarcerated pending an appeal. He was set to be sentenced on March 4th, which is in a couple of days, but the judge didn't remand him. He allowed him out on bond, which is highly unusual, pending an appeal, which his attorneys didn't even file. So once again, we have another situation where a judge seems to be showing his personal prejudice towards police officers who kill African Americans by making unprecedented sentences. As another case that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, Michael, and in this particular case, allowing a convicted officer or former officer to not be remanded pending the appeal that his attorneys didn't even file yet. He don't even know. I mean, they're expected to file appeal, but they may decide not to. So he made a decision of something that hasn't even happened yet. It was highly unprecedented. Michael, I mean, what are we to think of a criminal justice system where we see repeatedly where judges make these unprecedented, outrageous decisions, on behalf of white police found guilty of killing African Americans?
Well, I think that certainly even the staunchest critic, whatever position you might have, you would have to admit that this is preferential treatment. Now, certainly in a situation where a white police officer or officers, plural, kills a Black person, that preferential treatment shows itself by the way the prosecution is conducted, by the way the judge sets the tone in the courtroom. And then when there's a conviction, and now at the conviction, the cuffs are put on you immediately thereafter, normally. Right. the cuffs are put on you, you come back in time for your sentencing. It's unprecedented for the most part how you're going to be released at your own recognizance or whatever they might call it there until you're sentenced. And then without an official request for it, that's unheard of. So I would just say that, you know, when it comes to white and black situations, you can throw all the rules out of the books, because I'm tired of saying, well, I'm surprised that they did that. I'm no longer surprised. The white man has no respect for the law, and a white man in powers does not have any respect for the law. He is a power unto himself, and he does not care what you think, because white people will shake each other's hands when a white person does it, and they don't care. You know that saying about the lion cares nothing about the sheep that it slaughters. Consequently, the white man cares nothing about what you think. You can complain, you can talk all you want, you can say that's wrong, you can say it's unprecedented, and the beat goes on, because they know black elected officials are not going to say anything, and they know those civil rights officials that they pay off on a weekly and monthly basis, they know they're not going to say anything, because they're not going to end their gravy train. That's why you see these civil rights organizations quiet when it comes to these kind of things, because they know the same trough that they feed from is the same trough that so many others in civil rights and private industry and all of them are being paid off. So they just leave that alone.
And it's, you know, at the same time, unfortunately, they say that we have to go along with the system. You know, this is just the way the system works. I mean, we've had recently where a judge gave a police officer convicted of a killing a very lenient 2-year sentence when the normal minimum mandatory was between 7 and 15. Right. Many people were surprised because it was unprecedented. We had a situation where we had a prosecutor, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, without the partition of the victim's family, those 3 men who was guilty of killing their brother Jaga, she made a deal with the defense team to have these individuals serve most of their sentence in a federal institution as opposed to a state, which is considered beneficiary to a defendant. So we have prosecutors, judges who are showing so much more leniency to convicted individuals when they're white, as opposed to victims of these individuals. And at the same token, we're told this is the system and we have to cooperate with it. This has to come a point in time where we have to say no, and we have to demand, change. And, unfortunately, that's not what's happening, as we see so many outrageous decisions by some of these judges. As in this particular case, as you stated, Michael, normally a conviction, the person's remanded, the manslaughter taken to life. He's remanded into sentencing. The judge even said that his waiver of incarcerating this individual goes beyond the sentencing date. He says, he doesn't have to be remanded. He's going to file an appeal. We'll wait to a decision on the appeal, which is turning to even file yet. So that is so crazy. But, that is the system that we have. Another story, Michael, recently, an 8-year-old young child was shot, a female child was shot, and members of the fire department were overheard mocking her over their radio. Somebody had accidentally keyed in, so what they were saying was recorded. Bring our family up to date on that particular story.
Yes, now what happened was earlier, they were doing like, I guess you would call it a Zoom call. Now, I guess that's the term that's used, is Zoom situation where they were all on the phone. Now, the police had just killed the 8-year-old child. Her name was Fanta Bullety. Now, in this situation, the police department is looking at 12 counts of manslaughter. That happened a while ago, but the fire department, they were doing a call in on the Zoom, and after they dealt with their little fire business, they started dealing in, I guess, chit-chatting, so to speak, off the cuff stuff. And they started talking about the little girl, the 8-year-old girl who was killed by the police department. And then the N-word started coming out. They started mocking her being killed. They started saying things during the virtual meeting, which was online. They started saying things like those effing N-words. They started saying that those N-words are taking over everything, that they full of, sugar honey iced tea. And they started mocking black firefighters as lazy. And since her name was Fanta, and they don't know Fanta is a popular name in West Africa. So they was calling her Fanta soda, Fanta orange, or Fanta grape, making fun of her being killed. So this was overheard, and it was recorded by one of their deputy chiefs who was on the line. I guess they didn't realize, some of them are so dumb, they don't realize that when you have those type of Zoom calls, Noel, as you know, a person can record it. Either one or more, somebody else can record it. So in this particular case, it was recorded by the deputy chief, Tim Eichelman. And I guess he was upset, or he just showed it to other people after he recorded it, about all the N-words and what the things that they were saying about Black people. Consequently, they several of them have been suspended at this time. So while the police officers are being charged with 12 cases of manslaughter, the fire department, who made mockery of it, they are now, right now, as we speak, they're suspended.
And, Michael, I'm glad you brought this story up because it's so outrageous. It shows a lack of sensitivity that these grown men, they're firemen, of course, but these grown men would mock the unfortunate killing of an innocent 8-year-old Black girl. It shows a lack of humanity that they have, towards members of our community. And it also shows, as you said, it was also revealed because Black firefighters in the neighboring county had complained about racism that existed in this county. But to date, that their claims have been ignored in the over-exaggerations, like many people always sometimes do, saying, no, man, you'll see race about everything, you'll complain about everything. But this recording, which captured these individuals mocking fellow fire officers, with racist, derogatory language, prove that the claims, these allegations that these Black firefighters have been making for years was true. It's sort of substantiated. So this is a very unfortunate situation. And, I guess we have to keep our eye on the prize and make certain that these individuals aren't rehired, because sometimes a suspension, when the story gets out of the headlines, sometimes these individuals are returned, but clearly they don't deserve the right to be a part of a, fire agency, taxpayer-funded fire agency, with the kind of attitudes that they displayed and insensitivities that they displayed on those recordings.
And to add to it, now they're looking into complaints going back years, Noel, that they intentionally arrived to the Black part of town late to fire calls.
Right.
So now they're going to look at and do an investigation as to what time did these calls come in and what time did they arrive, because they know there's a pattern and practice showing that they get to calls on the Black side of town later than they get to calls in the white areas.
And also there are times, because these aren't large agencies like the FBI, sometimes neighboring fire departments assist each other, cooperatively. That's how it's supposed to happen. Sometimes Black firefighters even said they wouldn't even get off the truck
That's
You know,
right.
they would come lustily to the fire on the black side of town and say, listen, this isn't our jurisdiction, it's yours, y'all handle it. I mean, this level of unprofessionalism, racism, you know, clearly it existed over years. Hopefully it will be dealt with, you know, seriously dealt with.
But again, why do we have a U.S. Attorney General? Why do we have state attorney generals if they don't look into things like that? So even though I think the Fed should do it, every state has a state attorney general. They are put in the office by the voting public. They have a job to do. If these have been complaints for years, why hasn't the state attorney general in Delaware said anything about it? That's supposed to be a Democratic controlled state. So why hasn't there been any investigation before now? Why did it have to take firefighters who are calling us the N-word and it's recorded now to prompt an investigation in the complaints that go back years?
Right. And Michael, this is coming full circle to the story we talked about earlier when we talked about Biden's choice to the Supreme Court, and we talked about the Alabama black former federal judge W. Clement stating that Sister Ketanji Brown shouldn't be chosen because of her ignoring numerous lawsuits and complaints filed on behalf of African Americans against their employees. As you stated, Michael, there are presently individual systems set in place that should deal with these particular issues, that should investigate these issues honestly and make decisions in order to stop it. But individuals such as Ketanji Brown Jackson, according to W. Clemens, she's a gatekeeper for the status quo. You know, in this particular case that I mentioned from Lockheed Martin, who made the decision to settle with 5,500 black litigants, she do it. So as you say to Mike, when you have attorney generals, state attorney generals, or federal attorney generals not looking at allegations, and then you have the few times that a judge makes a decision over these incidents, and she, like Ketanji Brown does, that obstructs the whole process and is responsible for the maintenance of the status quo. We have, you know, unfair treatment by members of the African American community, you know. So, you know, to bring it full circle. All right, there's an incident in East Cleveland, Michael, where a PO assaulted, arrested, and then allegedly released a black defendant, primarily because community residents caught his assault of this individual on camera.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the video, but I'll just say that I watched the video and watched the police officer. His name is Ian McInnes. Police officer Ian McInnes approached the black man who was on the telephone right outside of Best Steak and Gyro's house. And that's in East Cleveland, a steakhouse. And he was outside on the telephone, and a police officer came behind him and demanded that he kneel down on the ground.
On the ground. On the ground. On the ground before you get tased. Turn around, get on the ground.
Hold on, Mama, I'm there.
Mama ain't on. Turn around, get on the ground. Get on the ground. Face down. On the ground, face down, you will be tased. On the ground, face down, or you will be tased. Face down on your stomach. On your stomach. On your stomach. Stay down. Put your arms out now. Do not move.
All I did was order some food to eat.
Do not move.
That's all I did. Yes. I got no warrant. They just want to group me general.
Yeah, you want to act a fool in here. You don't want to listen. I don't know how many times I got to tell you, get the fuck on the ground, and you don't want to get the fuck on the ground.
Get the fuck on the ground.
Stay there. Stay there. Stay there. Do not roll.
I'm at ease.
And stay at ease.
It's like a What will it show?
Now, it wasn't clear of what he approached the black man for because he was not committing a crime. But in any event, he told him to get on his knees, and the black man complied because he was surprised at first that he was talking to him, telling him to get on his knees. But when the black man complied and got on his knees, and he made him put his hands behind his back, and after he handcuffed him, he kicked him in his back, and now you can't use your hands to break your fall, and his face went into the pavement because he was on the ground, kicked him so hard, he went face first into the pavement. And then after he picked him up and cursed him out of all the foul language, he used all the F-bombs because he threatened to tase him during that whole process. He gets smart and realized that people were around. So he takes him to the hospital and then release him at the hospital instead of convicting him, charging him with a crime. He didn't charge him with a crime. He left him in a hospital and told the hospital officials, this person is under the influence of something, and just took the cuffs off him, left him in the hospital, and he left. And he thought it was over until the video went viral. The video of him kicking him in his back, going into the pavement face first, cursing him out all for nothing. And then he jokes with the guy when he let him go at the hospital. He said, "You lucky you didn't meet my dog, because if you had met my dog, you would have to have reconstructive surgery on your arm." So he let him go. So he thought it was all over. So now the chief of the department is launching an investigation because the video went viral. So now the chief has ordered an investigation only because the video is out and it went viral.
Right. And this is one of the reasons, Michael, I think we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. You have some jurisdictions, some states trying to obstruct the public's ability to record police officers while they're doing their duty for this particular reason, because if not for the video, of course, the only thing, whether it's the district attorney's office or the state attorney general's office or the police commissioner, the only thing they have to go off of is the police officer's version of what occurred. And I don't care how many community residents come and contradict officer's version. They normally, 99.9% of the time, go with the officer's version. So thank God for video footage. And if not, as you stated, for the video footage, they probably would have opened up an investigation. And when everyone took their eyes closed it and found the officer, not guilty of these atrocious acts. So we'll pay attention to see what happens with that. Our next story is something that's going on internationally. As many viewers may know, Russia has invaded Ukraine. This was pending for at least a month as the military forces have been gathered on the borders of Ukraine. Now, some people suspect, some people think that Russia is after some of Ukraine's natural resources, but I think it's deeper than that. NATO nations, they throw NATO nations out there, Michael, but NATO nations really white nations. It's a confederate of nations who have organized, saying, we got each other's back. Ain't no African nation involved in NATO, ain't no Latino nation involved in NATO. These are white European nations who have formed a confederacy saying, listen, I don't care what we do. If anybody attacked one of us, they attack all of us. And those of you know that NATO was started in 1949. Now it's compiled of 30 nations. Back then it wasn't. They're a military force to bargain with. Now, Russia, after the first NATO organization had what was called the Warsaw Pact. And Mike, you the head historian, so you can interject as well. And established in 1955 in terms of a counterpart. As of late, NATO have been, and with the breaking up of the Warsaw Pact and Russia, Soviet Union, NATO nations have been adopting some of these former Warsaw Pact or some former Soviet nations and have put military weapons and military soldiers in those particular nations. And Russia feels a little threat. Prior to this invasion, Russia had stated to NATO, listen, don't allow Ukraine to join NATO, because we have them with that. Something similar to America had when Russia allegedly wanted to put missiles in Cuba. President Kennedy said, oh, no, that's our backyard. It's not happening. We'll go to war if you don't back down off of that. Now, Russia feels kind of threatened that NATO is allowing all of these former Soviet countries to join, to be a part of NATO, their defense mechanism. So be it as it may, now there's a big skirmish because NATO refused to make the agreement that they weren't going to set, this nation into their organization. And now we have a big fiasco. What are some of your feelings about what's going on, Michael?
Well, I think when all is said and done, Noel, it's all about power. And America does not have the moral standing to be judgmental of anyone or anybody. America has invaded Caribbean countries, whether it was Panama, whether it was Grenada. I recall them going in, speaking of history, they went into the independent sovereign country of Haiti in 1915 and stayed to 1934 and devastated its economy in that process, and have always followed suits since then. France, Spain, England, America have blood sucked the so-called poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, Haiti. They have always made Haiti poor while financing some rich people, making a false middle class just to have some people with money while the nation remains impoverished. So they have set up systems and blood sucked so many nations. And as you call it, NATO, these are just white supremacist nations that will exploit the so-called darker people of the world, the melanized world. And so you have that situation worldwide. And I'll say one thing about Russia, and I don't pretend to know Russia's politics, but I know at that Berlin conference in 1884, 1885, throughout that whole process, the only European country that did not carve up Africa was Russia. Every other country, the Belgians, the Germans, Spain, Portugal, France, England.
Michael, you're naming all the countries in NATO.
Yeah,
you're naming all the countries that
they carved up and colonized Africa. Now these are the same ones that was involved in the slave trade, now colonized and went in and took the natural resources of Africa. Mm-hmm. How do they have the moral ground to judge anybody on anything? The devil can't call another devil a liar. So
let me interject.
Go ahead.
Let me interject, because you talked about Haiti and you talked about the slave trade, but we don't even have to go back that far. George Bush went before the United Nations, said that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. All of those countries in NATO participate in the invasion of Iraq, found out America was lying. There were no sanctions against America. There was no United Nations mandate. Barack Obama invaded Libya, a sovereign country, murdered, in both instances in Iraq and in Libya, murdered the president who was elected, destroyed the economy, destroyed the nations. I didn't hear a whimp from the United Nations. I didn't hear any sanctions. I didn't hear any protests. I didn't see any protests. So as you stated, the level of contradiction, practically all of the nations of NATO, at least the major ones, have all participated in activity that they criticize Russia for. The only difference is Russia is a white Ukraine is a white nation, and the nations that all of these NATO governments have invaded and murdered and overturned heads of state have been non-white nations. That's the only difference, because there's no between what President Bush did in Iraq, what President Obama did in Libya, to what Putin is doing now in Ukraine.
And just to backtrack a little bit, once President Muammar Gaddafi was removed from power in Libya, Arabs started killing Africans. Mm-hmm. The only thing that kept Africans from being slaughtered by Arabs, as you said, the way they took over North Africa, was Muammar Gaddafi, who said that Libya is an African country. He didn't call it an Arab country. He identified with Africa. And this is why a lot of Arabs did not like him, because they believe in Pan-Arabism, not Pan-Africanism. Consequently, he in turn, once he was removed, they started systematically removing all those blacks that was in positions and just started slaughtering blacks in the street. Even President Obama had to ask them to stop slaughtering blacks outright because it made him look bad.
And he actually opened up the door for that to happen. But right. Some people don't think that there's a racial component what's going on in Ukraine right now. CBS correspondent Charles D. Agata said, this isn't a place like Iraq or Afghanistan. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European. A former deputy prosecutor general of Ukraine, David Sakade, said, it's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed by Russian assault. Al Jazeera English anchor Pete Dawg, these are not people trying to get away from areas in North Africa. They look like any area that you would live next door to. And finally, Daniel Hannan, a British journalist and former pro-Brexit politician, wrote, they seem like us. That's what makes it so shocking. So there's, with the reporting that we're getting, there's a affinity that individuals, because they see the contradiction. You never hear this level of outrage, whether it be United Nations, whether it be a CNN, when these European nations, these members of NATO, and I don't even call it NATO, white countries invade non-white countries and murder and kill and overturn white countries. There's a point before we close, and we get into our closing moment. Also, there's reports that Africans in Ukraine are finding difficulty leaving. You know, they're facing racism. They're being blocked by police officers as they try to board trains. Some of them are pulled off of the bus and said they have to walk to the border of Poland. Some of Poland are allowing them to enter. So, you know, the racial component, even of this particular tragedy that's happening in Ukraine, is something that as African Americans, we ought to point out, because you're not hearing anything the ambassador, Biden's ambassador to the United Nations. You're not hearing anything from Vice President Kamala Harris as it relates to the way Africans are being treated, who are in Ukraine and trying to leave and having problems facing racism. But you're not hearing none of that from reporters. So once again, we find ourselves in this muck and mire. Michael.
Just thank you so much for pointing that out, because in the long run, we all we got, and we all we need, and we all that we should depend on. We should never depend on white people to fight other white people and our interests. We have to stake our claim and speak for ourselves. And thank you, brother, for pointing that out, because you don't hear that in the major media, what you just pointed out, brother. Thank you.
Right. And it's unfortunate that you're not going to hear that from our Black sister ambassador to the United Nations or our Black vice president. On behalf of Community Cop, we'd like to thank our engineers, Veronica Kitt, Nat Wood, Sheila Berry, and Big D. We'd like to thank you, our viewing audience, for watching once again. We asked for some comments on the YouTube channel or on our Facebook page. We'd like to talk to you, and we'll continue bringing these stories to our viewing audience. Closing comments, Michael?
Yes, just want to thank the William Mackey. We just had a successful Brooklyn William Mackey session with Dr. Truss Graham from Newark. Came in, did both sessions every other week and at the William Mackey lecture group, history group. And this Wednesday coming on the 9th, we will have Keisha Forrester from Thorough Black Talk, starting off Black Women's History Month. She will be the keynote then. And certainly on Saturdays, you can catch New Day Resurrection with Sister Filet. And certainly every other Wednesday, Dr. William Mackey. Saturdays, Darren Muhammad. And Monday mornings, every Monday morning, you can get the Irritated Genie. Black man, Black woman, protect the Black child, accept your own and be yourself.
Peace.